ELI5. How did NASA figure out the physics and materials necessary to send astronauts to the moon? How did they figure out what the space suits should be made out of so they can walk on the moon? How did they figure out what materials they should use to build the spaceship out of so it can withstand space? How did they even emulate space as an environment to test everything? How much of it was speculation? They knew the suit needed to be pressurized to withstand the vacuum of space. That's about 90 of the problems solved. One big issue they didn't anticipate was the dust from the moon being statically charged and sticking to the suits. It's basically microscopic bits of rock that are super sharp, so it did cause some damage when sticking in the creases and seams of the suits. There's a really good real engineering video about the design of spacesuits and the dust problem. I can link it if you're interested. There were an awful lot of space missions, both manned and unmanned, before the Apollo missions, during which we worked out what works in space, and really, it's mostly not that complicated. Being airtight to one atmosphere is not a particularly difficult thing to achieve. The laws of physics are universal, and the physics around the moon are identical to the physics around Earth. The vacuum of space is 14.4 pounds per square inch. The air pressure in a car's tire is 35 pounds per square inch. Hence, it wasn't as insurmountable as one might think it could be, as we deal with the environmental conditions quite regularly. The Hollywood effect of vacuum of space tearing people apart or sucking aliens through holes in a spaceship is just Hollywood being Hollywood. The Apollo program was very well funded by the US government. It cost $25.8 billion, which is about $260 billion in today's dollars. It involved the best American aerospace and computer companies to design and build the necessary suits, craft and launch facilities. Quite a bit of effort was put into testing, including a large vacuum chamber where things could be tested in a vacuum. 1. They hired a woman, a black woman too. They removed colored bathrooms throughout their facilities. 3. They trusted the work of a woman, a black woman. They didn't. Ask yourself one question. How does a pressurized system, Earth's atmosphere, maintain itself in the absence of a barrier against the vacuum of space? The rest sorts itself out pretty quickly after that. A lot of testing and missions dedicated solely on testing out different aspects of the mission. The Apollo program was solely dedicated with reaching the moon, but it wasn't until the 11th mission that this was actually achieved. Each previous one carried out a part of the mission in preparation of the actual lunar landing. If you are interested not only in the physics but in the whole story about the first moon landing, you should read Carrying the Fire, written by Michael Collins. There is a great episode of From the Earth to the Moon HBO series produced by Tom Hanks, about 25 years back, called Spider, that covers the engineering team that built the lunar lander and the process they went through to adjust to all the requirements from NASA, and how that drove the very unusual final design of the LM: no seats, pilot's fluid standing up, almost no windows, paper-thin skin, etc. I think one of the earlier episodes covered the decision to use the multi-stage lunar injection model that someone else mentioned. Certain cultures are great at engineering, testing, using, and re-engineering in relatively rapid succession. Certain cultures aren't. The USA's Air Force led the way after World War II to go higher and higher, testing what materials they had or could come up with. NASA took what we learned from wars and the Cold War, mated it to what the Germans had learned in rocketry, then advanced all of it. We already knew how to make pressurized vessels and suits. That transfers pretty readily from submarines and deep-sea diving suits. In fact, it's easier to build a hull to withstand the vacuum of space than the depths of the ocean. Everything else came from previous experiments and flights. They didn't send anyone up blindly. They knew what the environment was like in space and had a pretty good idea of the lunar surface. Space isn't all that different from the high altitude that planes go to, at least as far as pressure difference goes. The real ELI5 they didn't, at least not alone. Humans reaching the moon is the final piece in a much, much larger puzzle that started with Newton getting hit on the head with an apple hundreds of years ago and developing the theory of gravity. You know, all those fake scientists you've been hearing about who think they are know-it-alls but don't use any common sense? Yeah, turns out those guys are actually really smart.